This video will be a short introduction to Bloom's taxonomy. When I started here at DAC as a new instructor, I had no idea how to use this tool. I'm going to share with you what I've learned and how it can help you in the classroom. So what is Bloom's? It's an instructional theory that categorizes levels of learning. It's a tool for instructors to assist with learning outcomes, curriculum planning, content delivery, as well as assessment of learning levels. Each one of those Bloom's levels has a list of action verbs to identify the type of cognitive activity being performed by the student. Remember is the lowest level of the Bloom's cognitive levels. The action verbs that go with remember are memorize, reproduce, or recognize facts and terms. And then each step up builds on the one below, requiring a higher level of thinking and more difficult learning activities. Here's a graphic of the Bloom's levels. It moves from the lower to the higher order of learning as you go up the pyramid. At the bottom is remember, like we just said. So they would be memorizing at this level and reproduce things that they had memorized or recognize facts and terms. The next level up, understand, is being able to describe, to translate, or to restate in one's own words. Apply is to utilize, apply, or make useful. The next level is to analyze. This would be to identify and examine components, to compare or contrast properties, identify assumptions or deduce implications. And we're going to look a little bit closer at how we do this in the classroom with each one of these. The next level up is to evaluate, which is to make a judgment, to determine the validity of a claim or select and defend a position. And then the highest level of Bloom's is to create, to make connections and identify new relationships or design something new to the students as they learn. And so as you look at this pyramid, you'll see in my next slide, I'm going to start using, they abbreviate it. And so if you said it was a Bloom's level 1, then that would be remember. That's the lowest level. 1. And then if I said it's a Bloom's level 2, that would be understand. And so as you go up the pyramid and go higher, it goes up to that Bloom's level 6 to create, which would be a really pretty difficult assignment for a student, one of the more difficult ones that they would have. Okay, so let's look at how to use Bloom's. So there are 3 things that we're going to look at. There's a lot of different ways to apply Bloom's, but we're going to focus on these 3 examples today. So you can use Bloom's as action verbs, the action verbs that we were just going over, to write learning outcomes. Use Bloom's levels to structure course content, which is curriculum mapping. And then you can use Bloom's to then assess and measure how well the students are progressing through the class. So here's an example of writing a learning outcome using one of those action verbs. And this one's at a level 3 to apply. So this is one that's from one of my syllabi for the coding class. So the example here is the student will be able to, and we all have this in our syllabuses, and then we go through to write out our learning outcomes for the class. And this one is apply diagnosis and procedure codes according to current guidelines with 70% accuracy or better. And that's at a Bloom's level 3. And so I know the activity that the student is doing here, that's the difficulty level that I'm asking them to do. To structure your course content was our second item on that list of things that we were going to look at today. So how can Bloom's help you structure your course content? When planning your course, you start out with basics, beginning at a lower level Bloom's category. And as the student develops more skill and understanding, the difficulty level of the activity also increases. And so if we were looking at that last example from my class to do the coding accuracy, so the coding accuracy there, so this statement says, apply diagnosis and procedure codes according to current guidelines with 70% accuracy or better. So I would have in my course, if that was my beginning point or my ending point, depending on whether they're in intro to coding or advanced coding, right? So you just structure your course according to the content that you know you would have. And in my introductory coding class, I would start out with the remember levels. The assignments are much more simple, and I'm happy when the students are able to look something up in the alphabetic index and find it and arrive at the correct code with the correct digits. It's the remember, it's the understand how to get to a code. And their homework is also very introductory, where it's just maybe a statement like code pneumonia, and then they look up that diagnosis. So those lower level blooms are in my introductory course. And then as my courses become more difficult, or when they're in advanced coding, then I'm able to give them more difficult material where they would have an entire medical record and have to read and interpret the medical record and find the codes themselves rather than being led by the questions. So that's an example of how your blooms can help you develop your learning outcomes, which then helps you structure your course content as well. And so the number 2 on this slide is an important one. You want to plan your learning outcomes first so that the course aligns with your learning goals. So like my intro to coding, those learning outcomes for that class would go up to a certain Bloom's level or difficulty, and then my advanced class, then the activities in that class would get higher up to those Bloom's level 5s and 6s. So you don't want a course to start with the most difficult material, and we all do that when we develop our classes and helping somebody learn. But putting that down in your syllabi and then reflecting that in the assignments that you're doing and being able to reproduce that information by test blueprinting or curriculum mapping is a skill. And so we're going to have some other in-service recordings that will show you guys test blueprinting and curriculum mapping as tools and how they work and how they can be used to help you structure that course content. If you want to start out at lower level Bloom's levels and build up throughout a course, those are really good tools to use. This next slide was our third point that we were going to look at today, and that's using Blooms to assess. So course activities are designed to assess a student's knowledge and skill level. So when planning my courses, I match those learning outcomes that I have in those statements and match it with what's in the content of the class by looking at each assignment and the difficulty level of that assignment. So I often will ask myself, what are students performing in this class? Is it mainly memorization and recall? Are they being asked to create unique content based on things that they've learned in class? So these are the types of things that a student would be doing in class that would represent different Bloom's levels. And a multiple choice question can be made more difficult so that it gets to other levels of Bloom's. But if it's pretty much just a question that just asks the students to remember a fact and find it, that would be a Bloom's level 1. To summarize, to read, and then just restate kind of in their own words an article or research, that would be understand. And to ask a student to analyze a case study where they would read an example of a scenario and then have to develop maybe their own solutions to problems, analyze the problem and explain it. And so you can see that the Bloom's levels are able to measure how difficult the content in the class is, and then would reflect what the students are learning. So then when you give them an assignment or a test, then you're able to say this student is performing at this level, which when a class is structured from the learning outcomes and the content of the class on that syllabi, you're able to show that flow in the difficulty level of the class. I have a couple of tools that I use that help me to do this. I have a little laminated cheat sheet with the Bloom's levels on it and those action verbs to help me write the learning outcomes. And then I also have a really cool wheel that has like examples and stuff on it that shows like the Bloom's level and the activities that you would be looking for if you want a student to perform at a specific level. So in a nutshell, that is Bloom's, and there will be some other videos coming up that get into more detail in how to use them, how to do test blueprinting, how to do curriculum mapping. So there'll be some other videos on that. Here is my last slide, which shows you the link to the assessment website where a lot of other resources are for writing learning outcomes. And then a lot of this content in this slide, in this presentation, came from this is a really good resource at Top Hat. It's the Professor's Guide to Using Bloom's Taxonomy. It's a really good article. I would go out and read it. So thank you so much.